Something happened in October 2025 that no marketing budget could have manufactured. No tech journalist predicted with full confidence, and no Linux advocate ever expected to say out loud with real numbers backing them up. Microsoft made Linux the only rational choice for hundreds of millions of people, not by endorsing it, not by recommending it, by eliminating every other option that didn't cost. Money they hadn't budgeted for and didn't plan to spend. I want you to think about this from the beginning, because the chain of decisions that led us to where we are right now in August 2026 is one of the most perfectly constructed self-defeats in the history of the technology industry. And when you trace it step by step, you realize that this wasn't bad luck. It wasn't one bad quarter or one bad product decision. It was a strategy, a deliberate, internally approved, executive-level strategy that just happened to have one catastrophic miscalculation buried inside it. Let's start with Windows 11. When Microsoft launched Windows 11 in October 2021, they attached a list of hardware requirements that nobody in the industry fully processed at the time. TPM 2.0, secure boot, and processor generation restrictions that effectively ruled out any Intel chip older than 8th generation and any AMD chip older than Ryzen 2000 series. At the time, it sounded like a reasonable security posture. Microsoft talked about it in terms of hardware level encryption, improved boot integrity, and the future of secure computing. And most people moved on because Windows 10 still had years of support left and there was no urgency to worry about it. But here is what that requirement actually meant in practice. Roughly 240 million functioning personal computers, machines that browsed the web without issue, ran Office applications without stuttering, played media without complaint, could not run Windows 11, not because they were slow, not because they were broken, because they lacked a specific security chip or a specific generation of processor that Microsoft decided was the non-negotiable baseline going forward. Microsoft restated publicly that it had no plans to lower those minimum requirements, and that TPM 2.0 remained, in their own words, non-negotiable for all future Windows versions. So 240 million computers were placed outside the upgrade path. And Microsoft's plan was to give those users until October 14th, 2025 to figure out their next move. 4 years to either buy new hardware or find an alternative. From Microsoft's perspective, 4 years was more than enough time. The assumption was simple. People would upgrade. The economy would cooperate. New PCs would sell. The upgrade cycle would generate revenue for Microsoft, for Intel, for AMD, for every OEM in the ecosystem. The hardware gatekeeping wasn't a flaw in the strategy. It was the strategy. October 14th, 2025 was the official end of support date for Windows 10. After that date, Microsoft ceased all free security updates, bug fixes, and technical support for Windows 10. Machines kept running. Nobody's computer instantly collapsed. But every single day after that date, every unpatched vulnerability discovered by security researchers worldwide became a permanently open door on those machines. No patch coming, no fix scheduled, just a widening gap between what attackers knew and what defenders could do about it. And here is where Microsoft offered their solution, the Extended Security Update Program. For consumers, Microsoft initially announced a $30 fee for one additional year of basic security patches, extending coverage to October 13th, 2026. They later adjusted this, offering the ESU free for consumers who enrolled in Windows Backup using a Microsoft account, or who spent Microsoft rewards points accumulated through Bing searches and Microsoft purchases. The ESU program provides access to critical and important security updates for devices running Windows 10, version 22H2, but does not include other types of fixes, feature improvements, or product enhancements, and it does not come with technical support. Let that sink in. Critical patches only, no features, no improvements, no support. And it requires a Microsoft account, feeding your activity back into Microsoft's ecosystem, precisely because Microsoft's entire current business model depends on pulling users deeper into that ecosystem through every available channel. For businesses, the pricing structure is even more revealing. ESU licenses are priced per device at $61 for year one, $120 for year two, and $240 for year three. And they are cumulative. If you missed, the escalating cost is a deliberate pressure mechanism to push organizations toward buying new hardware and Windows 11 licenses. It is a monetization ladder, dressed up as a security solution. Now here is the number that changes everything about this story. Linux desktop adoption climbed from 2.76% in July 2022 to approximately 4.7% by 2025, a rise of about 70% in 3 years. And by July 2026, Linux's share of the US desktop PC market reached 10.65%, according to StatCounter's July 2026 survey, while globally, Linux holds 7.50% share. These numbers are debated for methodology reasons, but the directional signal is undeniable. Linux is growing faster right now than at any point in its 30-year history. And the reason it is growing has nothing to do with Linux advocacy. It has nothing to do with YouTube channels or Reddit threads or open source philosophy. It has everything to do with what Microsoft built, who it excluded, and what those excluded users discovered when they looked at their options and did the math. A math problem so simple that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And in the next part, I want to walk you through exactly what that math looks like on the ground, in the real world, for the people who are living it right now. The math is not complicated. That is what makes it so devastating for Microsoft and so liberating for the person sitting in front of a 7-year-old laptop that works perfectly fine. Your computer runs. Windows 10 is dead. Windows 11 will not install on your machine. A new computer that meets Windows 11's requirements costs somewhere between $400 and $700 at the low end of the market. Linux costs nothing. It installs in under 20 minutes. Your machine runs faster on it than it has in years. Security updates keep coming indefinitely for free, with no Microsoft account required, no subscription, no telemetry harvesting your usage patterns, and no advertisements embedded inside your own operating system's interface. There's no rational argument against that math for someone in that position. I have looked for one. I have genuinely searched for the counter-argument that holds up. And what I keep finding is that the counter-argument only works if you assume that the person has specific software dependencies that are Windows exclusive, or if you assume they have money they are willing to spend on a problem Microsoft created. For the majority of people sitting on orphaned Windows 10 machines, neither of those assumptions is true. And this is the part that I think the tech industry, including a lot of people who cover Linux regularly, have not fully processed yet. The 2026 Linux migration is not the same kind of event as previous Linux adoption waves. Every previous wave was voluntary. Someone got curious, someone cared about privacy or open source philosophy or customization depth. Someone read an article, watched a video, and decided to experiment. Those people were self-selecting. They skewed technical. They had already decided to be interested before they started. The people switching to Linux right now did not decide to be interested. They decided to survive. The retiree on a fixed income, whose laptop from 2017 runs everything they need, is not switching to Linux because they read a manifesto about software freedom. They are switching because the alternative is spending money they do not have on hardware they did not ask to need. The small business owner running a reception desk on a machine that handles appointments and invoices is not switching because they care about open source licensing. They are switching because $61 per device per year for enterprise ESU, doubling every subsequent year, is not a line item that fits in a margin that was already thin before inflation ran 3 consecutive years of pressure through every operating cost they carry. These are not enthusiasts. These are people who want their computers to work. And the Linux community, to its enormous credit, understood this audience. In 2025 and 2026, in a way it historically never had. Zorin OS alone reported more than 780,000 Windows users moving to Linux in the wake of the Windows 10 end-of-life announcement. That number came from a single distribution, not the Linux ecosystem as a whole. One distribution, specifically designed to lower the friction of switching, reported 750,000 Windows refugees in a compressed window around October 2025. And what Zorin OS did to earn those users is worth understanding in detail, because it represents something genuinely new in how Linux has positioned itself for a non-technical audience. Zorin OS 18 shipped time to October 14th, 2025, the same day Microsoft cut mainstream Windows 10 support and reported unusually heavy download activity in the immediate launch window. The timing was not accidental. The Zorin team understood that there was a specific population of users who, on that specific date, would be searching for exactly what Zorin offered. And what Zorin offered was not Linux for Linux people. It was a migration tool for Windows people who had no interest in becoming Linux people. Zorin OS 18 includes a Windows app detection system that can detect over 170 Windows installer files and recommend Linux alternatives to ease. Migration, along with built-in Microsoft OneDrive integration and a web apps tool that turns sites like Microsoft 365, Google Docs, and Microsoft Teams into desktop applications. That last feature deserves a moment because it is the kind of practical thinking that has been missing from Linux desktop development for a long time. You do not need to convince someone to abandon Microsoft 365 if you can give them a desktop shortcut that opens Microsoft 365 in a contained web app that behaves like a native application. The workflow stays intact. The familiarity stays intact. The learning curve drops to near zero. Zorin OS includes a Zorin appearance panel where you can switch the desktop layout between Windows style, Mac OS style, or a tradition, Al GNOME style without installing anything extra. This is not a minor feature. For someone who has used Windows for 15 or twin-ply embedded, every time that muscle memory hits a wall, it creates friction. Friction creates frustration. Frustration creates abandonment. Zorin OS eliminated that friction with a single settings panel. Linux Mint took a different approach to the same problem. Where Zorin OS works to make the switch feel invisible through active mimicry and migration tooling, Linux Mint emphasizes stability and efficiency, renowned for being reliable, lightweight, and ideal for users who want solid performance with minimal tweaks. The CI follows the same logical interface principles that made Windows 10 intuitive to begin with. Taskbar at the bottom, menu in the corner, wisdom tray in the opposite corner. File manager that works the way a file manager is supposed to work. Both distributions share some ething more important than their individual features. They are both built on Ubuntu's long-term support base, which means they enter. AIs, when Linux hardware compatibility was a genuine lottery, are over for mainstream laptops and desktops. Wi-Fi connects, Bluetooth PAIRS, printers from HP, Canon, Epson, and Brother are recognized automatically in the vast majority of cases. The live session you run from the USB drive before installing anything tells you everything you need to know about compatibility before you commit a single byte to your hard drive. And this is the detail that converts nervous people into confident people faster than anything else. You can the web, connect to Wi-Fi, open files, and confirm that your hardware works, all from a USB stick. The risk of trying is zero. And D for people who have been told their computer is obsolete. Discovering that it boots into a fast, familiar, fully functional desktop from a USB drive in under 2 minutes is the first crack in the wall of hesitation. Here is where the story stops being about indivi, dual users making individual decisions, and starts being about something much larger. Something that, once it reaches a certain mass, happening in government ministries, school districts, hospitals, and public administrations, at a scale that the open source community has been dreaming about for 3 decades and never actually reached until now. Let me give you the numbers that matter, because these are not projections or predictions. These are documented migrations that are already underway or already completed. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein confirmed that 80% of state government workplaces had switched from Microsoft software to open source alternatives by 2025. That migration covers over 30,000 workers across a functioning state government. It is not a pilot. It is not an e-experiment. It is a completed institutional transition that produced documented cost savings, documented efficiency results, and documented proof that a government can operate at full capacity on Linux without the Microsoft stack underneath it. The French gendarmerie began migrating to a custom Ubuntu-based operating system called Genbuntu back in 2008, and by 2013 had converted over 37,000 desktops, with that number continuing to grow since. This is a law enforcement institution with real operational demands, running Linux, ACR OS, its entire fleet for over a decade. Not struggling, not limping along, running. And that long-running success is directly why DWH had happened in April 2026 carries the weight that it does. On April 8th, 2026, France's DINUM, the Direction Interministérielle du Numérique, ordered every government ministry to stop using Windows and migrate to Linux, affecting an estimated 2.5 million civil servants. Every ministry. A coordinated national strategy with deadlines, formal migration roadmaps, and institutional accountability. Every French government ministry is required to put its migration plan in place by autumn 2026, including considering complementary software, such as antivirus tools, collaborative platforms, and related infrastructure. The scale of this is difficult to fully absorb. We are talking about one of the largest government IT migrations ever attempted anywhere in the world, driven not by ideology, but by a strategic calculation that digital sovereignty, data security, and long-term cost control all point in the same direction. The EU Executive Vice President Henna Virkkunen framed the reasoning in 5 words. We want to be sure nobody has a kill switch. That sentence explains more about why this is happening at the governmental level than any technical specification ever could. When a nation's entire civil service, its health, data infrastructure, its communication systems, its administrative records, all run on software owned and controlled by a foreign corporation, the operational dependency that creates is not just a budget line item. It is a geopolitical vulnerability. And governments across Europe have decided in 2025 and 2026 that the vulnerability is no longer acceptable. Combined, France, Germany, Denmark, Italy, and Austria have already migrated over 800,000 government workstations to open source alternatives. 800,000 workstations, real machines, running real Linux installations, handling real government work. And that number grows every month as migration timelines advance and new ministries bring their systems online. Now think about what this means beyond the raw count of machines. Every one of those 800,000 workstations is operated by a civil servant who now uses Linux at work, who now knows, from direct personal experience, that Linux works, that their documents open, their files save, their emails send, their video calls connect, their daily workflows execute without interruption. Those are 800,000 people who go home in the evening with first-hand knowledge that the thing their neighbor is afraid to try is actually just a computer that does what you tell it to do. That knowledge transfers. It moves through conversations at dinner tables and in break rooms and at school pickup and in the kinds of casual exchanges where technology decisions actually get made for most households. When the person who processes your government paperwork tells you they switched to Linux at work and it was fine, the psychological barrier drops. When the IT administrator at your child's school explains that they moved the entire lab to Linux and saved the district enough money to hire another teacher, the financial argument becomes tangible. When a colleague mentions their machine is faster than it has ever been since they installed Linux Mint on the weekend, the curiosity becomes actionable. This is how technology adoption actually reaches scale, not through specifications, not through benchmark comparisons, through trust transferred person to person through networks of real relationships. And right now, that trust transfer is happening at a pace the Linux community has never experienced before, because the institutional adoption is creating the workforce familiarity that feeds back into individual adoption at exactly the same moment that individual adoption is creating the social proof that makes institutional adoption easier to justify. The flywheel is spinning, and it is powered by something that does not require any external energy input to sustain. Every forced Windows update that breaks a printer driver or resets a default browser pushes someone closer to the edge. Every advertisement Microsoft embeds into the start menu of an operating system someone paid for reminds them that alternatives exist and respect them more. Every Copilot feature pushed onto machines whose owners did not ask for it, cannot disable easily, and did not consent to becomes one more data point in a spreadsheet of grievances that eventually tips into action. Microsoft is generating its own competition through success, not failure, through successfully executing a strategy of maximum ecosystem lock-in, maximum telemetry extraction, maximum subscription conversion, and maximum hardware gatekeeping. Every one of those strategies is functioning exactly as designed, and every one of them is accelerating the migration they were designed to prevent. So let me talk to you directly now, not about governments, not about market share percentages, not about enterprise migrations or institutional flywheel. Dynamics, about you specifically, and what actually happens when you make this switch. Because I spent time going through this process, testing distributions, reading through community forums, talking to people who switched in the weeks around October 2025, and I want to give you an honest account of what the experience looks like in practice. Not the idealized version, the real one, including the parts that are not perfect. The first decision you make is which distribution to install, and if you are coming from Windows 10 on a machine that cannot run Windows 11, the answer in 2026 is narrower than it sounds. For the overwhelming majority of people in that situation, the honest recommendation is one of two options. Linux Mint if you want stability, familiarity, and an operating system that gets out of your way and lets you work. Zorin OS if you want the transition to feel as close to invisible as possible with active migration tooling that handles the gap between what you had and what you're moving to. Linux Mint is best for absolute beginners and Windows migrants who want the smoothest possible transition, while Zorin OS is built specifically to look and feel like Windows, to the point where you can hand it to someone who has never touched Linux and they will find their way around in minutes. Both are built on Ubuntu's long-term support foundation. Both receive free security updates through 2029 and beyond. Both install in under 20 minutes on hardware that Windows 10 already ran on without complaint. The installation process itself is where most people's fear lives, and it is where that fear most dramatically fails to match reality. You download the ISO file from the official website. You burn it to a USB drive using a free tool called Balena, Etcher, or Ventoy, both of which take under 5 minutes and require zero technical knowledge. You restart your computer and boot from the USB. And before you install a single file onto your hard drive, you get a complete live desktop session running entirely from that USB stick. Wi-Fi works. The browser opens. Your files on the hard drive are completely untouched and completely safe. This live session is where you verify everything that matters to you before committing. Does your Wi-Fi connect automatically? Does your Bluetooth pair? Does your external monitor display at the right resolution? Does your trackpad feel responsive? Does your webcam show up? Does your printer appear in the settings? For the vast majority of mainstream laptops and desktops manufactured after 2015, every one of those questions resolves to yes without any manual intervention, Hardware compatibility in 2026 is not what it was in 2018. The kernel improvements, the driver updates, the hardware enablement layers that Ubuntu ships have closed almost every mainstream compatibility gap that used to make Linux hardware support feel like a lottery. If everything works in the live session, you double-click the install icon. The installer walks you through language selection, time zone, keyboard layout, and account creation. It offers you a choice between installing alongside Windows or replacing Windows entirely. If you are nervous, choose alongside. Dual boot gives you a safety net. A menu appears every time you start your computer asking which system to load. You use Linux for the first surprise when the desktop appears is that nothing is hard. That sentence sounds like marketing language until you experience it personally. The expectation, built from years of Linux having a reputation as a technically demanding environment, is that something will immediately require a command line, a configuration file, or a manual that takes an hour to read. For mainstream usage, none of that happens. You open Firefox, you browse the web, you check email, you open LibreOffice Writer and create a document, you watch a YouTube video, you manage your files. Everything works. Everything is where you expect it to be. Half its RAM that ran its fans constantly because something somewhere was perpetually indexing or updating or telemetry reporting. That machine boots into Linux Mint in under 20 seconds. Opens applications instantly, runs silently. The hardware did not change. The software changed. And the hardware, freed from the accumulated weight of Windows overhead, runs the way it was originally designed to run. Now the limitations. Because honesty matters more here than enthusiasm. Adobe Creative Suite does not run natively on Linux. If your daily workflow depends specifically on Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, or After Effects, that is a genuine constraint that deserves serious evaluation before you switch. Alternatives exist, and some are excellent. GIMP and Krita for image editing, Inkscape for vectors, DaVinci Resolve for professional video editing, which runs natively on Linux and is used by working filmmakers at every budget level. But alternatives require adaptation time, and adaptation time has a real cost in a professional context. Some competitive multiplayer games with kernel-level anti-cheat systems do not run on Linux. Check ProtonDB for your specific titles before switching. The list of incompatible games shrinks every month, but it is not yet zero. These are real limitations with known, fixed, verifiable boundaries. You can check them before you switch. You can make a fully informed decision based on your specific situation. Linux desktop adoption is projected to reach near 6% globally by late 2026, and that growth is being driven by people who checked, decided the limitations did not apply to their situation, and made the switch. They found a computer that respects them, that does not advertise at them, that does not reset their defaults, that does not surveil their activity, that does not demand they buy hardware they cannot afford to access software they already paid for. Microsoft made this comparison mandatory for hundreds of millions of people. And the comparison, once people actually make it with clear eyes, keeps producing the same result. Linux wins for the person who just wants their computer to work, their files to stay private, their settings to stay where they put them, and their money to stay in their pocket. Microsoft did not intend to build the case for Linux, but they built it anyway, decision by decision, requirement by requirement, deadline by deadline. And the people landing on the other side of that wall are not looking back.